Yo, 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 what's up, perfect people? Oh, wait, that's not my personality at all. Who am I kidding? How is everybody doing? I know it's been a week. At least it's been a week in my mind. First off, can you hear me? I had my microphone unplugged for a lot of this, or not for this, but before, and sometimes when you plug it back in, it doesn't register right. So hopefully you guys can hear me. All right, great. Got some feedback there. You guys can hear me. So did I ever tell you guys I coached gymnastics? I used to be a gymnastics coach. If not, now you know. So way back when I was a gymnastics coach, I coached team gymnastics, which is the competitive team. But I also coached, just regular recreational classes. I was terrible with preschoolers, so no one in their right mind put me with the preschoolers. I had the older kids. So I was, I guess, a class around maybe 7 or 8 years old. Actually, these two embarrassing stories. I'll tell you the other one later at another date. But I was stretching. The first thing you do in class, you do like a little run, and then you stretch with the kids, and you stretch them to show them how they should be, kind of help them get into something that resembles a split, because a lot of people don't know how to do that, and that's fine. But there's a thing that you don't want to do when you're doing this way splits. I don't know what the layman term is for this. I know that this is, middle splits or straddle. What is the term you would do with this way splits? The one with your left or right leg in front. Does anybody know? Anyways, side split, sure, we'll call it a side split. I was showing the kids to get, how a side split looked, and kind of telling them what they needed to do in it. As I was demonstrating, I demonstrated everything. So I was in shape. Anyways, there's one thing you don't want to do in a side split, and that is turn your back knee out. So you want to have it tucked underneath you, facing the ground the entire time. And so I told the kids, hey guys, make sure you keep your knee tucked under, because if you turn it out like this, you'll hurt yourself. And I turned my knee out, and yes, I hurt myself. I dislocated my knee doing that. And you know how sometimes you can, I don't know if you've ever dislocated anything, but sometimes when you dislocate something, it pops back into place. This did not happen. My kneecap was like on the side of my leg, and I was like buckled over in pain, laughing, because when I get into pain, apparently I laugh. And I was laughing, and I was telling the kids, hey, get coach so-and-so, the owner of the gym, she was there. Get coach this person, get coach this person. And the kids didn't realize I was hurt. They thought I was joking. I don't know why they thought I was joking, considering my kneecap was right there. Anyways, I couldn't finish the class. I had to go to the hospital. I had to be carried out by one of the gym owners and taken to the hospital. That was embarrassing. And I'm sure that for a 7 or 8-year-old, that was probably not a good experience to have experienced, right? It was probably maybe a little traumatic. And so we are going to talk about when a group of people experience trauma and what that means for that group. It is funny. I think it's funny. It wasn't funny at the time, even though I was laughing, but it was funny. I'm answering somebody who said, oh, that's not funny. So we're talking about what's known as collective trauma. Now, I said that story, but I usually do wait for about 10 minutes after so that everybody kind of floods in, but it looks like I have a decent amount of people here. So trauma in general is just an emotional response to a terrible event. And that emotional response is often maladaptive in nature, especially when you consider trauma in relation to needing to go see a therapist to kind of work through that experience. It immediately after the event, a lot of people will either be in shock or denial, and that's a very typical response. Longer term reactions to trauma include something like unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even can be physical in nature. You can have headaches and nausea, and some people will even vomit. So that's on an individual level. Now, collective trauma is a bit different, even though it's still trauma. It's, like I said, when a whole group of people experience a terrible event or a series of events, but the outcome ends up shattering the experience of safety for that group or groups of people who have experienced it. One thing about collective trauma that you may not see in individual trauma is that collective trauma tends to not occur in a vacuum. It occurs within a wider socio-political context. And it's a little complicated to treat because of the fact that if everybody experiences a trauma, how do you treat everybody? And I just think that that would be an impossible task in and of itself if we want to just talk about kind of working through the trauma. But the interesting part about collective trauma, at least the part that I find interesting, is that you do not have to be physically present or even there to experience it. You can hear it from somebody. You can see it later on in the comfort of your own home. You can, you can hear about it from another member in the group who did experience that trauma, but they're still within your shared group. And right now, I think there's a lot of experiences like that. And a lot of groups are in a stage to where these events can be historical in nature and could result in a collective trauma. And so there's that. Sorry, guys, I didn't mean to hurt your knees. It just wasn't a good experience. Another interesting thing about collective trauma or group trauma is that not only does one person they can hear it secondhand, right? Or even third hand, it can be multi-generational, meaning that it is a collective trauma that gets passed down from generation to generation. So it persists. And there's reasons why it persists. One being for group survival. So if a group experienced, let's say, a lynching, right? Somebody may be hesitant to interact with other people in the perpetrator's group, right? So if you know what I mean. So it's good for that purpose because you want to be able to stay away from anybody who could cause you or your group harm. It's logical in nature. And so future generations, they need to be able to understand and remember the potential for danger, right? So vigilance from group trauma is definitely applicable here. And it will be specifically towards the perpetrating group, but it doesn't have to be towards that perpetrating group. It could be just with other groups, just anybody that could potentially pose a threat and end up doing the same type of thing or things that the perpetrating group did. And this is adaptive to some extent, but it also can be maladaptive in another extent, because if you are hypervigilant against another group that wasn't the perpetrating group, but could be allies with you in fighting against that perpetrating group, but you kind of turn them away because you're just hyper vigilant about it. I feel like I'm going to burp. That could be problematic. You no longer have an ally. Excuse me. You no longer have an ally in the process or in the fight. So this is something that I guess I was reading, and some people may call something leads to post-traumatic worldviews. And it may be, again, that chronic distrust of other groups, and it fosters severe paranoia. And also it could foster aggression towards other groups that weren't the perpetrating group. One thing about trauma, I guess group trauma on an individual level, is that it often kind of activates other traumas. So somebody who experienced a recent trauma may kind of recall a previous trauma from the past. And this can definitely happen with groups as well. So if they have continually been attacked or targeted in any way, any type of attack and targeting in the present may lead people to remember and bring up the past and those past violations that they've experienced. When it remains, it's particularly chronic, and it's likely to kind of be passed down from generation to generation in a verbal way. And so sometimes traumas that are kind of at the group level aren't entirely accurate, but they still serve that essential adaptive purpose, which is to be careful with the other group that did that did do the trauma, or was the reason for the traumatic event occurring, caused the traumatic event to occur. So one thing about this as well is, like, we know that it's untreatable. We can't just treat everybody, right? But the more that it goes unaddressed, that maybe the perpetrating group says, oh, that's all in the past, while not recognizing the faults that their past ancestors played in doing the trauma, with not even essentially apologizing to an entire group, or not providing some sort of way to alleviate the pain that people have experienced, it tends to persist, and it will go on for generation to generation until that the cause becomes addressed. So this is something that, when I was reading, that I couldn't help but make some parallels with with slavery in the United States, and everything up until the Civil Rights Act, and also the next violations after that, because people from the Black community have continued to face traumatic events time and again. And to me, and I think that some people need to recognize this, that just shows how strong this community is to be able to function. Because most people, when they experience trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma, they collapse, and they are dysfunctional. They cannot do anything. But you have a whole community that continues to experience traumas, and they still are managing somehow. And I think that we need to recognize that. We also need to recognize why traumatic events not only continue to happen, but why it's so important to recognize and address the underlying causes of that trauma. Otherwise, as we see now, it will continue to persist as it does today. The perpetrating group, this is fascinating. They can do a series of things that could either make it better or allow it to continue. One of the things that they could do, again, to make it better, is to address it. One of the things that perpetrating groups often do is A, not address it, right? B, they say, oh, well, that's all history, nobody cares. That was all in the past, this is the present. they can also try to change the story or change history by saying, you know what, slavery wasn't that bad, even though it was terrible. We all know this. The Reconstruction and after Reconstruction wasn't that bad. Jim Crow wasn't that bad when it was. And the fact that a lot of people will just go, oh, that's all in the past, oh my God. It's like, I was reminded today that in, I think, around 1960, anyways, maybe before 1965, after 1960, but before 1965. So somewhere in there, and maybe you guys can tell me if you guys remember, or if you remember the date that this happened. In Mississippi, there were 3 men who were murdered for registering Black people to vote, even though they have the right to vote, right? It was the 60s. Of course, they should have had voting rights actually not restored, but provided to them. But there was a lot of pushback, and some of the people that were murdered were not Black. It was 2 Black men and 1 white man who was murdered for the simple fact of registering other people to vote. And it's alarming to me that people will still go, oh, well, that was in the past. It's like, dude, my mom was alive and conscientious of her life. She was born in the 50s. And if this was in the 60s, she could have easily heard about it. She could have known about it. Like I said, I mentioned that my parents went to segregated schools. So this is not even past history. Mississippi burning, thank you, 1964, torrential rage said it's 1964. I was thinking it was 1964, but I didn't want to be wrong about that. Freedom Summer Murders of 1964. Brad Bloom also mentioned that. So that's what happened, and this is relatively recent. If you think about even the founding of the United States, how not only is that relatively recent in historical context, especially in human history context, but even within the last 100 years type of context, it is a very recent event that still can be felt today, because many people, Black people, do not have appropriate representation via the numbers in Congress. They don't, and neither do women, by the way, but Black people especially do not. Okay, so Brad Bloom says that one who was killed was from Mississippi, and the other 2 were from New York. And they were in Mississippi at the time, I guess, is what you're saying. But so these are recent events. And it shouldn't be surprising to you when you hear the call for something like reparations. Reparations are, one, owed to these people, right? They, at least in my opinion, if you do not address something, again, it will continue to persist, and that community will continue to experience that trauma time and again. If you are interested in basically making a community whole, then you should not be against reparations at all. You should want that to be some level of acknowledgement that something horrible even took place in the first place. I don't even hear that, let alone reparations from a sizable majority of the United States. I don't even hear people recognizing that this was wrong. It was like slavery, it happened, we're over it. That's usually the narrative I hear. But I'm in the South, so I may be wrong about that. And it may not be everybody's experience, but it certainly has been mine. Targeted. But it certainly has been my experience. I've been coughing all day, guys, so sorry about my frog voice. I just, with the recent events taking place throughout the last, week or so, I don't even know what to say. I don't even know how to think about it. Not only did you have a community that once again had to experience a traumatic event, you had another community that was kind of brought into that traumatic event for when they protested against the initial event having taken place. In no way, shape, or form should someone be extrajudicially punished or killed, period. That is not the law of the land in the US. But apparently, it's okay in the United States, apparently. As long as these people who commit these atrocities time and again, if they're not held accountable for their actions, again, we're going to have that trauma continue to persist. And I don't know about you, but I don't want people to be in a state of trauma time and again. I just don't. And we should all be invested in that, regardless of where you are on this, whether you are experiencing the trauma or not, because it does create hostility. It has the potential to create hostility. So if you're not part of that community, but you do not feel the effect of that trauma, you should still be vigilant about the fact that that group can turn very hostile against you, even though you had nothing to do with any of it. So we should all have an invested interest in making a broken community whole, period. It's just, if you're a good human being too, that you shouldn't need a selfish reason for doing that. Self-preservation is pretty selfish, which is the main reason why I just said that. But if you're a good human being, you shouldn't need that as a motivating factor in order to address the problem. And I'm afraid we're going to continue to see traumatic events over and over and over and over again. I think that there is a sickness in society that has nothing to do with the trauma in and of itself. That can create another sickness. But I do believe that our society is very sick. I don't know how to help with that, or I don't even know how to cure it. I don't know even how any individual could possibly do anything. I don't even think electoral politics would fix the situation, because again, you would have to address the fact that a sizable group is responsible for afflicting that trauma onto another group and onto a minority group, right? And people don't want to do that. It brings up guilt. People get guilty when they do that. And they're like, oh, you're just trying to make me feel guilty. Okay, why do you feel guilty about it? Because maybe you know this happened and nothing's been done about it, right? You should feel guilty, in my opinion. You just should. I'm getting some interesting comments here, so I'm going to read some real fast. Majufi said, imagine the trauma of the children of Jacob Blake. Will they be able to see cops without rage again in their lives? My answer to that is probably not. I think, well, the Black community has always had traumatic events, especially caused by the cops. So that relationship was already broken to begin with. And it was never addressed. It continues to not be addressed. I think there's a large proportion of society now that at least wants to somewhat address it, whether it's, defunding, what is it? Defunding the cops, not, reformation, essentially. I don't think it'll work. I think that is a naive perspective to take. I think that they should be completely abolished. The reason why is because of the origin of the cops, basically. Where did they originate in the United States? Well, they originated from slave patrols. Their whole job was to protect the white wealthy people and from losing their property. And they went after their property, which were human beings. That was their job. And they continue to do that today. This is why we have the war on drugs. It's slavery, but in another name, when we have a sizable portion of the Black community involved in our criminal justice system in some way, shape, or form, whether they're on probation, parole, or actually in prison. So that is a dynamic that I cannot see any type of reformation fixing. I can see abolishing it and kind of just going, start over. We do need people to actually serve their community. Let's create a organization for that. Let's create another one for the other purpose, and basically strip all of those duties that cops have away from them, because they shouldn't be doing a lot of that work in the first place. But everything in the United States has to be criminalized because we have a private prison system that benefits from that criminalization. And the more people they have locked behind bars, the more money they get. And again, privatization is not necessarily the best solution to everything. I think, we're experiencing the continual dismantling of the post office, which, to be fair, was already in the process of being dismantled for years and years and years and years. Definitely pre-Trump, 2006 under the Bush administration, right? Yeah, Under the Bush administration, they instituted basically a rule that the USPS had to prepay retirement health benefits to their employees. They had to put it in what is essentially a trust, and that caused them to have to borrow money. And so I think I heard someone just say today that basically we loan sharked them, and we expect them to, I don't know, remain above water financially while putting that requirement on them, and then going, oh, look, they're out of money. They waste so much money. They aren't operating correctly, because apparently, and I didn't know this, but apparently they were supposed to be making a profit, because all government agencies that get taxpayer monies to serve the public have to make a profit, right? It's ridiculous. There was another comment that I wanted to read that that has now gone away. Supreme Scientist says, Black people in this country, the US, exemplify resiliency in the face of injustice. However, I worry that this narrative is used to justify or minimize exploitation and cruelty against them. That was something that was mentioned in some of the things that I've read about collective trauma, is that not often, but in some cases, it will do just that. People will start saying, well, they've been through a lot and now, they're better. They look how strong they are, so they can take it, or they've been able to take it. So why should we apologize for something we didn't do? I've heard that argument, and but in the thing that I was reading in the literature, I guess that is a way to basically minimize or try to kind of justify cruelty against a minority group who has experienced time and time again trauma. Well, yeah, Chris Freeman mentions that the police don't exist to help Black people who are in trouble in this country. If you call the cops for any reason, there's a chance they'll show up and kill you. Exactly. And even when you don't call the cops, there's a chance of that happening too. They'll shoot you and kill you in your own home. That's what happened with Breonna Taylor. And again, nothing is being done about that. Nothing. People, I think in, where was it? Louisiana, somewhere, people, if you guys know. Louisiana, before the hurricane, they were still protesting about this. So yeah, I think that protesting are tending to fall on deaf ears, unfortunately. I don't know a solution. I think, not to be fair, but how do I want to say this without freaking people out? The events that happened recently with the protester with a 17-year-old kid coming in with an AK and shooting 2 people to death and wounding another person, I think, and this is my conspiracy theory, I think it was a purposefully planned event that happened in order to rile up or to provoke a reaction from the group that was attacked, right? From the protesters, to provoke a reaction from them or to provoke future reactions from them in order to restrict rights. I honestly believe that's what that was designed to do. That doesn't mean to not protect yourself if you are, if someone comes to hurt you. That doesn't mean any of that. You have a right to protect yourself, to defend yourself against that kind of violence, or any kind of violence, really. You have that right, or you should. But if somebody on the left, and I keep going back to this time and time again, but left-wing activists have been used interchangeably. That word, left-wing activist, is used interchangeably in a ruling Ted Cruz wrote up that the president signed off on, or something along those lines. Was synonymous with terrorist. So I want you guys to be very conscientious of that, because I do believe that they are really looking for any reason whatsoever to basically restrict the left in any way, shape, or form. They don't like protests unless they're the ones protesting, right? We know this. Freedom of speech is great unless you're on the left. Otherwise, you better shut the fuck up. That's their perspective. And so I just want everybody to be conscientious of that fact, because I really do think that was an intentional thing to provoke a reaction, even though if you don't react, or I think it would be absurd to basically tell people to not react to, because they, again, have a right to. Well, you don't want to entertain my conspiracy theories so much, but Michael Contreras said that you're right. It looks way too calculated. Yeah, I agree. That's why I think that it was intentional. I mean, I was talking to a friend yesterday about this incident, and we brought up the fact that how many federal laws were broken. Kid it was a 17-year-old with an AK. So he didn't have a carry permit, right? He came from a different state and brought his weapon across state lines, which is a federal violation too. So how many federal laws in and of themselves were broken? A lot. And then you have, the police conveniently losing him. How do you do that? Oh yeah, unless it's it's an intentional thing that was orchestrated, right? That was orchestrated by them to restrict people's rights, because people will and honestly, I think, have every reason to react to that. Reactions are going to be varied. Some people will shut down. Some people will, protest harder. That's a thing. Some people will attack others, and all of these different reactions are definitely possible and probable in some cases, right? Contreras. Oh my God. Guys, I am so bad with names and I am so sorry. I know what Contreras, holy cow, Contreras. I know that last name. So I do apologize. Yeah, so here's somebody mentioning that, yep, no FOID card, and you have to be 21 to get here in Illinois. Get basically that right to carry, open carry right, I'm assuming. I'm so bad with names. I do apologize. Maybe I should just up front, but like right at the beginning of the stream, go, hey guys, sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name, and then move on, because I already apologized. Does that work? But one thing that I do want to also mention about trauma specifically is, as I mentioned, there will be a multitude of reactions, and as is expected, right? I think reactions are fine. I think that if you want to never protest again, that's self-preservation, right? That's a fine reaction to have. And you have every right to do that. Someone else will take your place. If you want to protest harder, that's also a reasonable reaction to have. Do it. If you feel safe enough to do so. Burn, loot, murder, G Hammer. Yeah, G Hammer mentioned something that continues to get me, is that, yeah, the peaceful protesters are also known as rioters. Okay, so let me back up on that. So when there was an analysis done not that long ago, maybe, but pre-Trump administration, I'll tell you that. There was an analysis that was done that looked at the media as far as how these public events, let's call them public events, right, where people try to address grievances in public fashion with a group of people, how they were framed in the media. And more often than not, when it was a minority group, they were more often than not labeled as rioters, or the protest was labeled as a riot. But when it was basically right-wing organizations protesting, or people on the right protesting, it was often labeled as a protest, and they were not rioters. They wasn't labeled as a riot. It's kind of strange to me that none of this is strange to me, to be perfectly honest. I just don't know how to express it because I'm so angry. I do not know how to express any of it. They were no angel, as you hear in the media. And guess what? They still shouldn't be shot dead by the cops. They are still have a right, per our Constitution, because that's a thing, to due process. If you have I'm gonna be like them. If you have a problem with that, go to China. That's what they would say to us, right? If you do not like the American Constitution, live elsewhere. You do not have to live here. You probably have the means to leave, way more than minority groups do. So leave to some place where rights are way more restricted, like North Korea. You would love North Korea. And frankly, with all of the honest attacks against protesters, sometimes I'm like, yeah, burn shit to the ground, do it. People pay attention when that happens because apparently property is more valuable than life, because nobody pays attention when the actual incident occurs and the reason for the protest, right? They only care when, a building gets caught on fire. Whoop-de-doo. Like, why wasn't it burned down sooner is always my question. Okay, so formerly Rodline says that there's a fine line between protest and riot. I believe it's easy to get them blurred. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that there is a marked distinction between a protest and a riot. Riots are basically, what is the imagery that you can imagine, or what imagery is evoked when you hear the word riot? You think of basically kind of violence, right? You think of violence. And I think this is why there's a narrative that harming property is an act of violence because they want it to be, right, perceived as a riot and not a protest. And it should not, but be it riot, be it protest, right? The cause of both of those things shouldn't be ignored. Why people have gathered needs to be addressed. And if you're focused on the actions of the individuals who have grievances, right? Well, or why, if you focus on that and not why they are there in the first place. If you don't like protests, if you don't like riots, then maybe you should focus on addressing why they're there in the first place. Don't restrict their rights, right? Don't tell them they have no right to be there, because that's not true. That's a lie. You made that up. Address it, and legit address it. Stop ignoring it. Stop pretending like it doesn't matter. It alarms me how nonchalant people can be about this. It alarms me because we are creating basically a generational problem, a continued problem of trauma that continues to be afflicted, and that is frankly painful. And if you don't care about that, then you're a bad person, because I don't want anybody to be in pain. I don't know about you, but I don't. You are a bad person if you don't care about that, because I am under the impression that, if one community is affected, all communities are affected. If one person has their rights restricted, all people do. Because you know how easy it is to kind of go, okay, give a little bit more. It's that person's being affected, but I'm not. Okay, you know what? Yeah. Okay, next, it's your brother, it's your sister who's affected, and then it's you. And then by the time it's you, it's too late, right? It's kind of like that poem, it's akin to that. Eggs64 said, we as Americans only understand shock and awe, which is why 9/11 hits hard versus COVID, with people not getting it. And it's literally a 9/11 level death number every day. You're right. I think that it's not being reported to in the media. This COVID deaths aren't really being highlighted by anybody in positions of power. In fact, they have done everything in their power to ignore it, to say it's a hoax, to say it's not happening, and then, blame China, right? That doesn't mean, let's say China did it intentionally. Let's say it originated there, they cooked it up in the lab, and they gave it to their citizens for some reason. Even so, right, that doesn't mean you don't have a responsibility to protect the people who put you in power, right? That doesn't mean that you, as a person of power, didn't fail people too. You should still be held accountable for this, period. And I think people get a bit distracted when it's like, oh, but China. Yeah, and what? What does China have to do with your responsibility? I don't know why people fall for that. I'm sick and tired of people falling for that. I don't know. Well, I do know. It's because they're not very smart. That's why. Formerly Rod Line says, I in no way think property has more value than people. That said, those building are where people work, live, etc. You do affect real people when property is destroyed. There is human cost to it. Yeah, but it's, again, not as valuable as human life. If you're concerned about the property being destroyed, again, let's address the underlying cause as to why they were even there in the first place, right? If you address the underlying cause, then guess what? There's no reason at that point to destroy anything. There's no reason to protest or to gather. And for people to, again, get kind of tripped off and focus on what I believe to be the wrong thing is pretty tragic, right? It's indicative of not actually caring about the underlying problem, at least in my opinion. From my view, that's how it is, because that's history in the United States has seemed to say as much, right? And I'm just using that data to basically tell you that very thing. Aaron A says, also citizens should hold themselves responsible for each other and not blame China and media hype when discussing COVID. I think that I'm a little bit mixed on this. So I did a sarcastic tweet the other day about how, how public health is your individual responsibility, which is kind of funny to think. When it comes to COVID, it is a public health issue, right? And if you are, as an individual, expected to do something about it, I think that that's a little bit too much to put on an individual. Because again, when you're getting so much misinformation about it in the first place, how at that point would an individual be responsible for the failure of their leaders? I just don't think that is fair. I don't think there actually is much media hype around COVID. I don't think that there's enough media hype, to be perfectly honest. I was reading an article today about a shared or collective trauma surrounding the COVID pandemic. Now, this has happened in basically countries where people are more aware of the situation and are more aware of the death rate too, than the US. So I guess the US may not experience trauma until more people die. I think that if it goes away, great. We'll return to everything. I'll go back to the gym and do gymnastics, and I'll be, happy, and everybody else will be happy if it goes away. I don't think it will, and I don't think people will take it seriously until more people die. I just don't think that until, in the United States, unless you're personally affected, then you don't give a shit about anything else. So maybe people should be personally affected by something like a pandemic, so that they actually do something about it. I just don't think that people will, unless that's the case. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe I have a very poor view of my fellow citizenry, but that has been my life experience. Talking much. You're right. So G. Hammer mentions that the media, I think this is in relation to COVID, the media are not really talking much about it anymore, are they? I don't think so either. Other distractions for them to report on. Well, yeah, whether they're distractions or otherwise. I think I saw an article today and it was so dumb. It was from a major news source, by the way, but it was just such a trivial thing. It was like, so-and-so wears the wrong dress or something just so trivial. I mean, with all the things happening now, right? There's enough of things that are serious for you to actually focus upon. Then, oh no, it was something like I think it was from Fox News. The Democrats did something at the DNC or something like that. It's like, so, and what about like all of the bad stuff happening right now? And I think they do it intentionally to detract. And so people don't really know, so that people aren't really informed, or so people believe that the things that are serious aren't that serious because, hey, the news is talking about so-and-so wearing the wrong dress or somebody saying this at the DNC. I guess all the things that I heard about aren't really that bad, are they? I think that is kind of on a weird level what's going on with those things. It's a way in which to keep you either in a state in a coma about the things that are happening, or it's a way to make sure you aren't informed about what is happening. Yeah, I don't even think that will be the case. So Ed64 said, it's legit going to take a politician's child or grandchild to die from it before someone wakes up. Maybe. I mean, I think maybe. And you may be right to some extent. The more further removed from a family member, I think the less likely it'll be taken seriously. Like, I seriously wonder if they had a grandchild die from it, I seriously wonder if they would take it seriously then. That's a question. And the weird thing is, and the thing that gets me is that shouldn't be a question, right? Politicians shouldn't be so inhuman. They should actually be, human, normal feeling people with emotions and with empathy and compassion towards others, because then society may be a better place. But there is that question: would they even care if it was somebody that removed from their inner circle, their inner familial circle? I don't know. I was reading an article about a couple. They were not old. They were married. I want to say they're probably in their 40s. And they basically didn't take COVID seriously. They thought it was a hoax. So they just kept doing what they do in their life. They kept going out. They weren't wearing masks or anything along those lines, weren't taking any precautions at all. Both of them, shocker, got COVID. Both of them got sick from it. And one of them died. His wife died. And the weird thing that was about, not a weird thing, but I guess the thing about this particular case is that the husband was the one that basically said, oh yeah, just listen to these people. It's a total hoax. That he was the one that brought that back to that family and I guess to his wife. And then she listened to him for some reason, because I guess it's, her husband and she wanted to. And then she died from COVID. So it's something that, again, should be taken seriously because people are dying from it. In the article, he mentioned, or the husband that lost his wife mentioned, I wish I had taken this seriously. I wish I had, not believed it was a hoax or not listened to that. I wish I had listened to the news at the time about it, but instead I didn't. And now his wife is dead because of it. And that's the tragic thing about it, is that he did not believe it. He did not take it seriously. He did not warn people, warn others. He did not, do anything for his family to prevent it from coming home until he got it himself, until he experienced loss himself. It was only then that it was like, oh shit, this thing is real, right? And oh shit, we should have been listening. That, I think, is the mindset in the US. Again, unless it happens to me personally, then it doesn't matter. And I think that this is why another thing that I say the US, at least society that I know, is sick. I don't know if it's something that will ever be cured. Maybe the only way to cure it is to allow that society to die in a way. Not the people to die, but like the overarching society to no longer exist. I don't think that there is a point of a society if it's not fulfilling the essential duty of sharing the resources among the people in order to increase one's survival. That's the purpose of society. Now, if you live in a society that's antithetical to that, there's no point of having it anymore. I'm reading some comments, so that's what's going on. Okay, so I think G Hammer mentions that the media are not really. Oh wait, I already read that, guys. Also, they're trying to make this the new normal and just go on about our lives. Egg64 says. I don't. Well, so what is this in that regard? Is it the pandemic and ignoring the pandemic? Is it the protests? Is it the murders by cop? Because honestly, that was the normal to begin with. This is not a new thing that's happening. That has happened. This has happened since cops existed, right? And it has consistently been ignored. It's only when people that aren't a part of the minority group, when they get attacked, that do people actually notice. And that's horrible, by the way. Ujda Shil says, we live in a society. Yeah, we do. Thank you for that astute observation. I know we live in a society, but I think that if society isn't fulfilling its essential duty, it has no reason to exist in the first place. We need to really back up and try to, take a hard look at why we exist as a society to begin with. What is the purpose of society? Because I do not believe the purpose of society is to make revenue, to make money, which seems to be the purpose of American society, but that is not really the point of society, right? It's to, again, gather resources and share it among the group in order to increase one's survival. People aren't really surviving all that well in the US, if you haven't noticed. We have the lowest life expectancy out of all of the quote unquote modern nations. We have the lowest education level out of all of the modern nations. I mean, we are number one in being really crappy. We have the most people in prison, period, in the entire world, even per capita. We have, which is an indictment on us. It's not an indictment on prisoners. Let's just be real. We have one of the worst healthcare systems, which is why we do see about 100, what is it? About 100,000 people dying from COVID a day. Am I right? But no, 1,000 people. I don't know what the number is anymore. I've forgotten. I think RNA's been following it, because every time I ask, he tends to say, oh, this many people. So RNA, if you know, 1,000 a day on average. But who would ever know? It's why we actually have one of the worst media media too, as far as news is concerned. We have the most uninformed citizenry as far as current events are concerned, and especially world events. There's just a lot of worsts that America has that, as a society, we shouldn't really be proud about, and we should actually try to do something about it, because I personally don't want to be the worst at something. I want to be the best at something. I want to actually be proud of something. And in my lifetime, I don't have anything to be proud of regarding my country. I just don't. No, nothing. Nothing. So yeah, so I'm trying to make a, okay. So one thing that I also think is kind of a problem too, and will probably lead to even more and more group trauma, right, is the state of the economy, right? People are getting evicted. People have lost their jobs. I think within a week, another 1 million people claimed jobless, submitted a jobless claim. So that's a lot in a week. And the week before, it was like 900,000, which isn't far different from 1 million. Again, a lot there too. The week before, another 1 million this week. It's going downhill. But we've got a certain segment of society that both doesn't care and is doing just fine. We'll say that. They make their money off the stock market, right? They aren't subjected to the same financial problems as the rest of America is, because we've socialized the stock market. So it works really well for them. We do everything in our power to make sure it does not crash. And when it does, we kind of ease it a little bit by inserting funds into it so that the rich can continue to maintain and collect and increase their wealth. But we're not socializing anything for the little guy, right? We're not, I guess some states haven't even taken the additional $400 for the unemployment claims that I guess the executive order inserted. The majority, I think only 2 states went with that. Every other state has not. And that's why there's such a disconnect between how the rich feel and why the stock market continues to go up, but also why people like us are suffering. And there's a huge disconnect there. And it's because we socialized the stock market. We are so messed up. If that is our priority as a country, if that is our priority as a nation, is financial in nature, again, we need to reassess our priorities. We have a healthcare system that allows people to fall into bankruptcy in order to save a loved one's life. We have a healthcare system that forces people to have to make a choice between medication and food. Or medication and medication. Like, okay, my heart won't give out for another few years, so I'm going to use my diabetes medicine and pay for that until I can afford the heart medicine too. That is not a choice that a rational nation or rational society would ever place upon somebody, ever. And it's just remarkable to me that people still believe that everything's fine. Well, maybe they don't believe that, but that, things were fine, that the current economic system, it may be struggling right now, but it'll get better. Don't worry. I don't know about you, but aren't you tired of these boom and bust cycles? Right? Why is it that now I think every 10 years we go through another economic recession of some sort, or even a depression? Like the jobless numbers are pretty stark right now. I think it's either at Great Depression levels or worse. And it was the Great Depression that caused a rise in a different set of belief until someone came into office that kind of negotiated that in order to maintain the current economic system that's in place. But they did make things happen, right? Because of that incident. But we're not seeing the same response. We're not even seeing the same anger from individuals that are affected, except I did read an article, I think, about how protesters had crafted a guillotine outside of Jeff Bezos' house. Did anyone see that? Well, they did. So I think that unless, there's more type of that, there's more type of like warning signs to those who are very, very cushy in their positions. If there was that, they may actually react. But unless there's, a big outcry that actually will affect the people in power, they won't do anything. They have no incentive to do anything. They don't even care to do anything. I mean, look at the stimulus, right? That was supposed to be planned for struggling Americans. That fell, right? That the negotiation there blew up because part of it, people wanted, one side wanted to give more money to billionaires, more tax breaks even. I think that, and they wanted to make sure people no longer invested in Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, which is stupid, right? They wanted that. And the other side wanted more money for people, and that side didn't want that. They said, you know what, we give them money, they're lazy, they won't get off unemployment if we just give them free money. I'm like, one, what's the problem with free money? So what? Is it going to affect you personally if somebody gets free money? No. And what about your, billionaire friends that don't lift a finger? They make a few $100,000 a day with doing nothing, yet they've earned more of government money than people who are unemployed through no fault of their own and were working and can't find a job. Are you serious? There are heavy restrictions around unemployment too, benefits. You have to be looking for a certain amount of jobs per day or per week in order to qualify for unemployment in many states. You have to jump through a lot of hoops just to get that benefit. But again, apparently, according to some people in this country, they don't deserve it because they're lazy if they get that. It's just wild to me. Right. So Egg 64, and this is actually really sad. I don't even want to get on the number of moving trucks and vans in my own neighborhoods from evictions. Plus the stimulus money is going to go back into the economy anyways. We got no choice but to pay our bills and debt. Right. I just think that people maybe as a collective stop paying their stuff, even the ones who have jobs. Because if everybody does it and demands something change, that they will continue to withhold money unless something changes, then the only thing people in power listen to is money. And unless they are affected from it, they're not going to do anything about it again. So G. Hammer mentions that it's the same in the UK with benefits. People are labeled as lazy because they're not working. And the thing is that I don't understand why that's the case. Like, what is it to you if someone else is lazy, right? Why do you so very much care about that? Why do you not care about the fact that, basically people that get inheritances, like let's say people that get $1 billion inheritances, don't lift a finger in their life? Why do you not consider them lazy, but you consider people at the bottom lazy? That makes no sense to me. Oh, well, they earned it. How? How did they earn it? What is wrong with us if we're that brainwashed to believe that? If we're that easily brainwashed to even believe that? I go back to the question of, okay, who do you personally know that's lazy? This is for the people that have that argument. I mean, you say that. Who is it? If you know someone who is on unemployment and will never get off of it per se, why aren't you doing anything about that individual? And nobody has an answer. Nobody. They're like, I don't know anybody who's lazy. Everybody's around me is working hard. Okay, so if everybody around you is working hard, why isn't everybody around everybody else working hard, except for the billionaires at the top? It makes no sense. Everybody has an imaginary somebody that may be like that, but not a real somebody who may be like that, right? You can never point to an example of somebody actually doing it. And if you can, it's like 1 out of 100 million. I mean, it's ridiculously low, kind of like voter fraud, actually. I think this just went into more of a rant stream. Aaron A. mentions that I love how you chuckled at the thought of them making one guillotine. Speaks to how different the worldviews are. Yeah, unless people really are in their faces about it, they're not going to do anything, and people will continue to suffer. It seems to. I was listening to somebody today, or it was either today or yesterday, about the state of the economy, and they basically said that at some point our economy transferred from a consumer-based economy to something else, and where people at the top are no longer affected by consumers. And so since that is the case, they really have no incentive to do anything for anybody who's unemployed right now, for anybody who's facing or has faced or is, or will face an eviction. They don't have to worry about it because consumers no longer matter. It was an interesting perspective, and kind of I could see how that's the case too. I think some billionaires may be kind of susceptible to it, but because of the fact that we've socialized their primary source of income, which is usually the stock market, again, they're going to be just fine. Aaron A. says that when I was unemployed, I had to document that I looked at 20 jobs a week. It was harder to document than actually look for the jobs. That's crazy. That's insane. I think, our priorities are kind of backwards. Again, it's one of the tactics that we have heard or that is employed in order for the little people to fight amongst themselves and not fight up, right? It's well, they're doing that, or somebody around us, maybe somebody, from a minority group is behaving this way. And so all of us be punished for it by no longer having any type of social benefits whatsoever. Even though that's not a true thing, we're all must be punished and not be able to vote by mail because of voter fraud. That doesn't happen. But this is how susceptible we are as Americans to such talking points, to such propaganda, because that's all it is. You can't back it up with actual data, but you just say that it happens. And so in the minds of many Americans, you said it must be true. It's absolutely bonkers, right? And sometimes I just want to go, like shake people awake, but I can't. I can't do anything. I can rant, right? And that's about it. I cannot impact anything in our society, despite living in it, despite being affected by it. I have no say in the matter. And for those people that go, you have a say, vote. Go fuck off. Because my voting preferences are not people that get elected, period, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on with the D and the R thing. That is not who I would vote for. That is not who I want in power. I want somebody who actually is impacted like the little guy is. I want somebody who knows people who would be impacted, or knows how policy would affect their community in a very real sense. We don't have that. We have somebody, and maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but we've got somebody, in many cases, we have politicians that claim to live in areas of the country, but have never really lived there. They have a house and know that they can come into power there. And so all they need is an address. We have that. And so they're so disconnected even from the community that they purport to represent, that it's laughable for anybody to tell me to go vote, that my say is to vote, because look at who we're voting for. Majufi mentions that voting is the small part of democracy. Voting is an aspect of democracy if and when you live in a democracy. If you don't, it's not, right? I'm under the impression that we do not actually live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy. We live in a completely different system from a democracy. If we lived in a democracy, we wouldn't have rights restricted from people. We wouldn't have particular communities suffering, because they would be well represented, as would all communities. But that's not the case. And no way, shape, or form has, at least from what I know, in no way, shape, or form has the U.S. ever been a democracy. It was, in any situation where you have any group of people not represented, you do not live in a democracy, even if you personally have representation, which is the case throughout all of American history. We had slavery. We had people that weren't considered people. They didn't have the right to vote. Thus, we did not live in a democracy. We had Jim Crow, again, where they weren't really allowed to vote. We do not live in a democracy. We have, even after Jim Crow, we had people threatening Black voters' lives to prevent them to vote. We have voter restriction. That is not what you would do in a democracy. So at no point has the United States ever been a democracy. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be a democracy. That's actually the opposite. I think it should be a democracy. I think that just because it hasn't been doesn't mean it can't. But as long as we continue to assure that, to believe that we live in a democracy, we will not have actually true democracy. Does that make sense? Because if people, believe it, they don't see the problem. If people do think they're represented, they don't see the fact that, lobbyists and companies get their laws passed and inserted into bills, and companies sometimes write the law. I don't know of any person. I can't just write a bill and send it to my congressperson. That isn't a thing. That isn't even an option for people like me or people like you. But it is for a company or a large corporation. Is that a democracy? Because I would argue that it's not. Anyways, what I was trying to say with that is that, people have less of their, wants and desires and needs addressed than corporations and people who are super wealthy. It's them who are prioritized by the Congress over the little guy, because the rich people, fund their campaigns, right? And the little people don't fund them enough. So it's the tragedy of the system in which we live. Again, as long as people believe that we live in a democracy, nothing's going to happen. And we will not live in a democracy if that's the belief, at least right now. Oh, okay, yeah. Also, I hate it when people respond like this. Aaron A says, also before someone random commenter later on says, America isn't a democracy, it's a republic. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. I'm like, and a republic is a kind of democracy, or cannot be a democracy too. All a republic means is a collection of areas that have come together in order to have some overarching type of government. That's all a republic means. So having states come together to have a overarching democracy would qualify as that. But it could also be a democracy at the same time. There's nothing preventing that system from being a democracy at all. This is such a weird response, right? Like, oh, you're complaining about the US not being a democracy. Well, it's never been a democracy, so who cares? That type of thought process is unhealthy, to say the least. That is not addressing even the problem, right? Well, wouldn't you, who says that comment, want to live in a democracy, or are you okay not living in a democracy? Because to me, it sounds like they're just fine with it. Okay, I'm about to shut this down too, but I just asked you how to pronounce this, and I'm going to butcher it. So Howie Now says, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure listening to someone intelligent after arguing with my fellow citizens about COVID being a hoax and all that. Yeah, so this thing isn't exclusive to the US. I know that this individual happens to be from Germany. So this is a worldwide problem. And I know why, but also I don't understand why people are falling for it. But I think that there's some kind of, what was I was reading today? I was getting, tripped off and reading something else that didn't matter at the time. But it was, what was it? It was was destructive obedience. That's what I was reading about today. And in relation to something like that phenomenon where people won't wear masks or, listen to someone else and believe them, and then therefore put them and other people's lives and health at risk. And I was reading about destructive obedience. So I think it's kind of something akin to that. And what I had read so far, I haven't gotten kind of deep into the literature, but what I had read so far is that there's some kind of aspect of authoritarianism involved that would make someone more likely to participate in destructive obedience than others who would resist it. But I think that's for another day. I think I'm going to do a video on that, like a produced video, not one of these rants. Yeah, that's crazy. So supreme scientists on in relation to what I was just talking about who funds campaigns and about lobbyists getting all the priorities and people not. Supreme scientist mentions that fewer than 400 families are responsible for almost half the money raised in the 2016 presidential race. Wow. I believe it. I totally believe it. All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you guys for allowing me to rant. I hope you at least learned something in the process. I wanted to get to the fact, but then I started ranting about how this kind of collective trauma could create group solidarity too. So if you are experiencing this phenomenon, there are other people that are experiencing it too, especially from recent events that have taken place. You're not alone. And so I want you to keep that in mind so that you don't feel so isolated. I know the COVID experience has made a lot of us feel that way, as if we're kind of the only people that, are paying attention to some of these things and are being hurt by some of these things and are trying to scream to people to kind of wake up and listen. You're not alone. I mean, I just yelled about it for about an hour. So you're not by yourself. Oh, Majufi, the worst part of the idea of going back to work, it's that I usually work Friday evenings. Oh, well, I hope you enjoy going back to work regardless. I really hope that everybody who has a job or will have a job is enjoying their job, because for people that have had to basically forgo what they've always wanted to do or what they currently want to do in order to get by, that shouldn't happen. And I completely think that that's wrong, and I wish I could make it right for everybody. All right, guys, have a great weekend. I don't even know what to say because, I have a feeling that, we'll probably be talking about something tragic next week. I hope that's not the case, but it feels like it might be. So just do your best, do the best you can to try to stay whole. If you're whole, if you're not, try to keep your broken self at least somewhat together. All right, guys, have a good weekend, and I will talk to you next week. Bye. End stream, says this button, and it didn't end it. Bye.